Hey guys, tonight we're dimming the oil lamps and stepping into a world that's somehow both glamorous and deeply sticky. The brothels of ancient Rome, not the romanticized candlelit ones from bad history dramas, but the real luminaria cramped stone rooms, squeaky straw beds, and walls painted with, let's just say, instructional murals. So before we start, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of nonsense. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is. Somehow, it is always 2 a.m. somewhere, and someone else about to fall asleep to ancient Roman gossip. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soothing background hum, and get comfortable. Maybe even light a candle, preferably not scented like Eau de Gladiator. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what it really smelled like inside a Roman brothel? How much did it cost? Who was allowed in? Did senators have loyalty cards? Were the workers treated like celebrities or furniture? How did anyone feel sexy after bathing in communal soup water? Would you last a single shift in a city where your Yelp reviews were scratched into stone walls? Would you flirt in Latin? Or would you just panic when someone orders the Deluxe Venus package and you have no idea what that means? Congratulations, you've just woken up in ancient Rome somewhere between 50 BCE and oh no, Caligula as emperor. You're standing in the shadow of the Colosseum clutching your tunic and realizing the moaning sound isn't ghosts, it's business hours. Welcome to the Roman brothel. Population, regret, perfume, and politics. The night air of Rome is thick with olive oil smoke, cheap wine, and the faint sound of someone trying to sell love for 3 coins. The city hums like a beehive that discovered gossip. Along the narrow cobblestone alleys, lanterns flicker over painted signs, crude cupids, suggestive pomegranates, and arrows pointing to entertainment. You're not just walking down a street. You're walking through an ancient adult advertisement network. You can feel the city breathing hot, sticky, and overconfident. The air is alive with the clatter of sandals, the murmur of conversations that never should have left the whisper stage, and the splash of wine poured far too generously for the hour. A stray dog trots by, carrying what might once have been dinner or someone else's sandal. A merchant shouts something about fresh figs. Somewhere, someone else shouts something about fresher company. It's late, but the Roman night doesn't believe in bedtime. Not for the bakers, not for the thieves, and definitely not for the lovers. Around you, every shadow hides a deal, coins exchanging hands, favors promised, secrets traded for just one more cup of watered-down wine. The stones under your feet are slick, worn smooth by centuries of sandals and spilled stories. A group of soldiers stumble out of a tavern, laughing so hard one nearly falls into a fish cart. The fishmonger swears at them in Latin so creative it could qualify as poetry. The soldiers don't mind. They on leave, pockets full of denarii, and Rome is ready to relieve them of every last one. You pass a wall covered in graffiti messages carved by bored lovers and drunken poets. Restituta loves Primus, one line declares. Underneath, in different handwriting, Primus loves everyone. Its history as first social media thread, and it's just as messy. The smell hits you next, not bad, just complicated. A blend of olive oil, sweat, roasted chestnuts, and the faint metallic tang of the Tiber nearby. If you've ever stood next to a food truck parked beside a sewer, you get the general idea. Rome smells like ambition and regret marinated in garlic. Street performers linger on corners, trying to earn a few coins before the brothels open their doors. A man in a cheap toga recites terrible poetry about Venus' beauty, only to be heckled by a woman selling oysters. A child darts past with a tray of honey cakes, yelling, "Hot and sticky." And you can tell if he's selling dessert or describing the city. Down one alley, you hear a different kind of music, soft laughter. The rustle of fabric, the low murmur of negotiation. A woman leans from a doorway, her hair catching the lamplight, her smile professional. She calls out an invitation that's equal parts charm and sales pitch. Cheap, fast, and quiet, she promises. She might well be advertising delivery service. You hesitate not out of morality, but because the cobblestones are uneven and your sandal just slipped. Somewhere behind you, a flute player attempts a love song and misses every third note. The melody wobbles through the night like a drunk pigeon, yet somehow adds to the atmosphere. The lupanaria, the brothels, are just ahead, tucked between taverns and bakeries, as if pleasure were just another Roman industry, sandwiched neatly between bread and beer. Painted signs on the walls feature Venus, Priapus, and other gods who've clearly been working overtime. One doorframe is etched with a price list, another with a warning. No credit. Rome was many things, but it wasn't stupid. You catch snippets of conversation as you walk, whispers about senators seen in the wrong places, courtesans charging more than priests earn, a client who forgot his toga in the excitement. The city thrives on this gossip. It is the real currency, more valuable than gold. The deeper you wander, the louder everything becomes. Music from taverns bleeds into the rhythmic clinking of coins, into the distant sound of someone yelling about the chariot races tomorrow. A drunk citizen trips over a cat and apologizes to it. The cat ignores him, because cats have always been that way. You stop near a fountain, one of Rome's many. The water sparkles faintly in the lamplight, carrying the smell of wet stone. People gather here, a young couple arguing softly, a woman washing wine cups, two men discussing. Politics like they invented the concept of hypocrisy. Everyone is pretending not to notice the brothel just across the way. Everyone's failing, and as the night deepens, you realize this isn't decadence, it's routine. For Rome, pleasure isn't sin, it is infrastructure. The lupanaria are as normal as the temples, the taverns, the markets. Life, in all its messy glory, happens here loud, unashamed, and slightly sticky. You tilt your head back, listening to the city hum. Somewhere, an argument turns into laughter. Somewhere else, laughter turns into silence. The lanterns sway in the warm breeze, painting gold across the cracked walls. For all its grime and chaos, there is a strange beauty here, the kind that comes from a city so alive even its shadows gossip. Welcome to the streets that never slept. Rome is awake. And now, so are you. You push open a low wooden door and step into the lupanar, literally, the wolf's den. The air is humid and smells like incense and decision-making. The walls are covered with bright frescoes showing every combination of human enthusiasm. Each small stone room holds a bed, a lamp, and the faint echo of centuries of questionable choices. Congratulations, you've entered Rome's least subtle workplace. The first thing you notice is the light, or rather, the heroic attempt at it. Oil lamps sputter in their little clay bowls, their flames stuttering like interns trying to explain a mistake to their boss. Shadows dance over the painted walls, where muscular gods and pliant mortals demonstrate every ancient athletic event that was part of the Olympics. You don't need to read Latin to understand these murals. They're not subtle. The floor is cool under your sandals, made of mosaic tiles, some cracked, some sticky, all tired. A faint hum fills the air. Whispers, laughter, sighs, and the occasional sneeze. The smell is complex, a layered bouquet of rose oil, sweat, smoke, and optimism. If Fabrizi ever made a scent called Roman regret, this would be it. Each tiny room, called a cellar, is barely big enough for 2 people, 3 if they're very determined or paid by the hour. The stone beds are covered with straw mattresses that have seen things, unspeakable things. You imagine the conversations these walls could tell if they weren't trying so hard to forget. You glance around. There's no privacy, just thin curtains or doorways so small you have to crouch to enter. Clients shuffle past each other like confused shoppers in a discount store, pretending they are here for the art. A courtesan leans in the doorway, her smile both practiced and tired. She's wearing a tunic that might once have been white and now matches the general mood. Beige resignation. You realize how transactional everything is here. The brothel isn't about romance, it is logistics. The Lena, or madam, sits near the entrance with a small ledger, keeping track of time, money, and occasionally who owes her new sandals. She doesn't smile not because she is cruel, but because she has seen everything twice. She is the quiet CEO of chaos. In one corner, a small shrine to Venus glimmers under candlelight. Someone has left a wilted flower and a few coins. A clay figure of Priapus, eternally confident, stands nearby, which feels like overkill. The workers touch the altar as they pass, not for luck, but maybe for protection from bad clients, worse nights, and lead poisoning from the makeup. You listen. A couple of voices filter through the walls, one laughing, one not. The stone muffles everything but doesn't hide it. You realize this place runs on rhythm footsteps, coins dropping, murmured prayers, the creak of wood. It's the heartbeat of a city that has no shame left to spare. The madam waves you toward a bench near the back. She looks at you the way a modern barista looks at someone who doesn't know what venti means. You sit, pretending to be confident. Around you, clients haggle like they were buying fruit at the market. 2 denarii? For that, I could get better in Trastevere. A man complains, while the woman he is speaking to rolls her eyes and adjusts her hairpin, already bored. A gust of night air slips through the door, stirring the incense smoke into lazy spirals. Outside, Rome roars. Inside, it hums low, steady, relentless. This isn't a place of passion. It is a factory of survival. The workers here aren't temptresses. They are professionals, craftsmen of illusion. They sell escape. 1 half-hour dream at a time. And yet, there's dignity here, in a strange, stubborn way. The women chat quietly between clients, trading jokes, sharing combs, laughing about the men who fall in love after 5 minutes. He promised to free me, one says. He can even free himself from his wife, another replies, and the whole room chuckles. You lean back against the wall and feel the rough plaster beneath your fingertips. It is still warm from the day's heat. You think about how normal this all is, taxed, recorded. To the Romans, this isn't scandal. It's Tuesday. Somewhere a door creaks open. A client leaves, straightening his toga and pretending he's been at the temple. Another enters, face flushed, coins in hand. The Lena makes a quick note in her ledger. The lamp flickers. Time rolls on. You stand, taking one last look around. The frescoes glow softly in the light. Frozen scenes of desire painted 2,000 years ago. The colours may fade, the names may be forgotten, but the stories, the very human messiness of it all, linger in the air. Outside, the night swallows you again, and the door shuts behind with a wooden sigh. You exhale. The city smells cleaner out here barely. The sounds of laughter and footsteps echo down the alley. And as you walk away, you realize the Lupanar isn't just a place of pleasure. It's a mirror showing Rome exactly what it is: powerful, indulgent, unapologetically human. Forget written menus, literacy was optional. Instead, the walls were the menu. Painted above each doorway, illustrations of services, prices, and positions so clear that even a centurion could understand them after 7 goblets of wine. You look around. It is like walking into a museum curated by someone's drunk uncle. Each fresco is vibrant reds, ochres, and faded blues that once glowed under the flicker of oil lamps. The scenes are explicit but oddly artistic, like someone really wanted to make the Kama Sutra educational. Above one door, a couple engages in a balancing act that would require both core strength and a safety net. Above another, a reclining goddess smiles serenely as coins tumble from a man's hand. Subtlety was not the goal here. You step closer, examining the details. The paint is cracked with age, but still bold enough to make you blush, or maybe that's just the heat. The artist clearly had a sense of humour, because some of the characters wear expressions that range from bored to deeply confused. One man looks like he's about to sneeze mid-passion. Another seems to be calculating his taxes. The pricing system is ingenious in its simplicity. Numbers next to figures, sometimes just a few chalk lines or scratch numerals. 2 asses for this, 5 for that. That is the ancient version of a price-per-minute subscription model. The Lena, of course, updated these regularly, ensuring no one could say they didn't understand what they were paying for. The Roman Empire may not have had Yelp, but it definitely had dynamic pricing. You tilt your head to take in one mural of particular enthusiasm, 3 figures, 2 amphorae of wine, 1 very confused goat. You decide not to ask. Rome didn't invent chaos, but it certainly perfected it. The air smells of warm plaster and incense smoke. A client stumbles past you, squinting at the pictures like he is ordering from a fast food menu after a night out. "Ah, yes," he mutters. "Number 4 looks good. With wine, please." The Lena raises an eyebrow, unimpressed, and scribbles something in her ledger. It's all business erotic capitalism at its most efficient. The workers themselves pass beneath the paintings like living reflections of them, each woman and man echoing the scenes above, dressed in colours that match the art. They know the imagery sells. A courtesan gestures toward a painting of a reclining Venus and smiles. "That one is me," she says proudly. You're not sure if she's joking, but either way she's marketing genius. You can't help but marvel at how normalized this is. To modern eyes it feels scandalous, but to Romans it's just Tuesday night entertainment. Families walk past these walls, merchants haggle nearby, and nobody clutches their pearls. This was an empire where public baths doubled as dating apps and temples occasionally hosted orgies. A painted wall? Child's play. Some murals are surprisingly tender couples embracing, gazes soft, hands intertwined. Others are pure chaos. You spot one where a man seems to be slipping off a couch mid-act while a bystander offers him a towel. It's both historical and relatable, because deep down, even the ancients knew that sex is awkward and gravity is undefeated. As you move further in, you realize these frescoes weren't just decoration. They were code, a discreet way to communicate preferences, class, and even taboos without saying a word. Some symbols meant romance, others dominance, a few were experimental. To an outsider, it's the art. To a regular, it's the menu board of their social calendar. You pause by a faded inscription at the corner. Someone has carved a review right into the plaster. Fortuna was excellent. Fast service. Will return. Below it, someone else scrawled, "Not worth 2 asses." It's the world's oldest comment section, passionate, petty, and misspelled. You half expect a reply thread and an argument about tipping etiquette, and then you see it. A faint smear of red pigment, forming a small painted handprint. It's human. Real. A mark from someone who lived, worked, and touched this wall thousands of years ago. The air feels suddenly heavier. For all the laughter, commerce, and absurdity, there is a heartbeat beneath the paint, because that is what this wall really is, not just a menu of desire, but a catalogue of humanity. Lust, boredom, pride, loneliness. Every colour, every brushstroke is a confession disguised as advertisement. You step back, the lamplight catching on the glossy fragments. Somewhere in the next room, someone laughs, and the sound echoes off the frescoes, bouncing between the walls like history refusing to fade. You realise you had just witnessed one of Rome's great contradictions, an empire obsessed with order, yet immortalized by chaos. The menu may have faded, but the appetite never did. The workers, mostly enslaved foreigners, were the backbone of this industry. Greek, Syrian, Gallic, they came from everywhere Rome conquered. Each name changed to something seductive: Chloris, Lydia, Fortuna. Beneath the makeup and laughter was survival. Every smile was a performance, every coin a small rebellion. You see them moving through the dim rooms like a quiet tide, each step practiced, every gesture calibrated. They glide from one client to another with the ease of experience, laughing, teasing, sometimes pretending to listen to bad poetry. They know how to flatter a soldier's pride, calm a merchant's nerves, or distract a senator from his political guilt. It's a kind of theatre, and they are world-class actors who never get to leave the stage. Most of them were brought here by forced captives from wars Rome fought far away. They came in chains, were sold in markets, renamed by owners who wanted them to sound exotic. Their old identities erased, their new ones crafted to sell fantasy. Lydia might once have been a farmer's daughter from Gaul. Chloris might have spoken fluent Greek before Latin was beaten into her. Here, they are merchandise with stage names, like pop stars without royalties. The makeup is heavy powdered lead for pale cheeks, ashes for eyeliner, red ochre on the lips. It's poison, slowly seeping into their skin. You wonder if they know, but then you realize it doesn't matter. In this world, danger is routine. Vanity is just another tool of survival. They joke with one another between clients, their laughter brittle but genuine. One adjusts another's hair, another shares a sip of watered wine. There's a sisterhood here, fragile, fierce, necessary. They keep each other sane, trading gossip, curses, and occasional dreams of freedom. Freedom, that strange, shining word. Some buy it after years of saving every spare coin. Others are promised it by lovers who never deliver. And yet, every single one of them imagines it a life beyond the stone walls, under open skies, with no more strange hands and fake smiles, in a city that worships pleasure. They dream of peace. Not all are women. You notice a few young men, equally adorned, equally trapped. Rome had no limits when it came to indulgence. The same laws, the same taxes, the same exhaustion applied to everyone. Desire was democratic, suffering was too. One of them, a tall woman with dyed red hair and sharp eyes, catches your gaze. "You're new," she says softly. You nod. She smirks, not cruelly, just knowingly. Everyone is. Once. She goes back to her work, but you feel the weight of her words. Everyone is new until they're not. Until they've learned to play the game, to smile when they want to scream, to flirt when their soul is tired. The madam watches them from her corner, a hawk disguised as an ant. She knows every secret, every trick. She can tell when a worker is sick, or when one has stolen from her, or when someone's fallen in love, the most dangerous sin in this business. Love complicates the math. Love doesn't pay rent. The workers move like a machine that runs on charm and adrenaline. They know how to keep customers calm, when to fake laughter, when to stay silent. One whispers softly to a nervous young man. Another rolls her eyes at an overconfident merchant. It's a dance of power, delicate, dangerous, and centuries old. And yet, for all the pretending, there are flickers of real humanity. A woman humming a lullaby to herself while folding a blanket. A man adjusting a cracked oil lamp so the light falls more kindly on a scar. A whispered prayer to Venus, not for beauty or wealth, but just to get through another night without tears. You start to notice the small details: a bracelet made from string, a charm hidden under a tunic, a scrap of fabric embroidered with someone's name. These are their rebellions, tiny pieces of self that no master, no law, no empire can take away. In a place built to strip identity, they smuggle fragments of it back in. Outside, the night buzzes with laughter and coin. Inside, these workers build an empire of their own, one made of endurance, quick wit, and the art of pretending everything's fine. Rome runs on power, conquest, and spectacle. But it's these people, these nameless, tired, clever souls who keep the illusion alive. You stand quietly as one of them lights another lamp, the glow spilling across the frescoed walls. Her face softens in the light, tired, yes, but proud. In her eyes you see defiance, the kind that survives through centuries. Because history may have written them as shadows in someone else's story, but in truth, they were the ones holding the torch. At the centre of it all was the Lena the Madam, equal parts accountant, gossip queen, and mob boss in a toga. She kept the books, bribed the guards, and occasionally brokered love affairs between senators and courtesans. If you crossed her, you'd have found your debts written on the wall, or worse, your name scratched out of history. She sits behind a low wooden table, a clay lamp flickering beside her, its light catching on stacks of coins and wax tablets. Her name might be something unassuming, like Flavia or Alia, but nobody dares use it. Around here, she's just a minor mistress, boss, ruler of this small empire of perfume and peril. The workers move around her carefully, the way sailors might move around a sleeping sea god. One wrong word and the tide could turn against them. You watch her dip a stylus into wax, scratching notes with sharp precision. Every transaction, every favour owed, every debt all meticulously recorded. She's the CFO of Sin, running the most efficient pleasure operation in Rome. Somewhere in her ledger is the secret economy of the entire neighbourhood. Who visits, who pays late, who's secretly broke despite their golden toga pins. If information were wine, she'd be drunk on it. But she's not cruel, not exactly. She's practical, which in Rome is more terrifying. When a guard threatens to raid the brothel, she knows exactly which senator to remind of his previous visit. When a client refuses to pay, she sends a polite message carved discreetly into the tavern wall. Owes Fortuna 3 denarii, and a dignity he can afford. Nothing motivates prompt payment like public embarrassment. Her look is timeless. Hair pinned high, jewellery heavy enough to double as a weapon, and eyes that can turn a man into ash at 20 paces. You realise quickly that in a city obsessed with power, she has carved out her own version of it, one built not on armies but on secrets. She knows everything. Which senator is cheating? Which priest has an interesting definition of chastity? Which noblewoman has a taste for sailors? People pay her for silence more than pleasure. Her real business isn't sex, it's discretion. If the walls could talk, she'd already have edited their dialogue. One of her workers approaches timidly, asking for a new tunic, the old one too torn to pass as charming. The Lena doesn't even look up. You'll get one when you earn it, she says, but her tone isn't cold. It's simply math. She has a business to run, mouths to feed, bribes to maintain. The empire might have emperors, but in this tiny dominion, she's the one keeping order. You imagine her morning routine counting coins, managing schedules, soothing egos, dodging taxes. She's a one-woman bureaucracy, and she does it in sandals. Every brothel in Rome has a Lena like her. Women who started as workers survived long enough to rise through grit and strategy. They are part manager, part mother, part menace. There is gossip that some of them keep spies informants who report on powerful clients. Maybe it's true. Maybe that is why she smiles when she sees a senator step through the door. Not because he is paying, but because she knows something he'd rather die than share. You hear her laugh low, rich, the kind that carries authority. She is talking to a merchant who's arguing about his bill. You drank my wine, she says, broke my cup and frightened my girls. That's not pleasure, that's theatre. You pay for both." The man sputters. She raises an eyebrow. He pays. Rome is efficient that way. Her table is cluttered with trinkets, a bronze mirror, a half-eaten fig, a small figurine of Venus. You wonder if she ever prays. Probably not. The gods might judge, but she doesn't have time for divine hypocrisy. Her morality is pragmatic. Protect the girls, keep the guards away, and make sure the house survives another week. As the night deepens, she finally leans back, stretching her arms. Outside, the laughter fades. The lamps dim. The workers clean, the air thick with the smell of oil and exhaustion. She counts the last of the coins, arranges them neatly, and sighs. For a brief moment, she looks tired, not weak, but human. Then she straightens again, the mask sliding back into place. This house is her kingdom, her burden, her triumph. She's not immortal, but her type will always exist, the woman who runs the chaos while pretending it is under control. Rome will fall one day, but the leaner will outlast it in spirit. Practical, sharp, unbothered. And as you step back into the night, you realize she's the quiet architect of this world, the one who keeps the empire's most fragile illusion running smoothly. Because while men build statues to power, women like her are the ones who keep the candles burning. Inside, you might rub shoulders with anyone's sailors, merchants, even a senator pretending he is undercover. Some brought gifts, others brought fleas. Every brothel was a social blender where class disappeared, replaced by the universal language of "Don't tell my wife." Occasionally a goat wandered in. It's Rome. No one questions the goat. You step further into the lamplit maze where the scent of perfume fights a losing battle against humanity. The clientele of the lupanar are as diverse as the empire itself. Rough sailors with sunburned faces, foreign traders jingling with coins, and senators in expensive sandals trying very hard to act like they are slumming it. If Tinder had a physical location in first-century Rome, this would be it, only with more toga stains. A group of soldiers crowd near a corner, laughing too loudly and slapping each other on the back. They've just returned from the frontier, their pay burning holes in their pouches. One of them proudly proclaims that he hasn't bathed since Germania. Judging by the air around him, no one doubts it. The courtesan he approaches takes one whiff, changes her mind, and redirects him toward the baths with the efficiency of someone who's done this before. Merchant waddles in, smelling of wine and ambition. He's wearing a tunic that cost more than most people's homes, and yet it is still stained with what might be fish sauce. He greets the leaner as if they are business partners, and in a way, they are. His trade is grain. Hers is distraction. Rome's economy needs both. Then there are the senators. They arrive in disguise, which is to say, without their usual entourage of flattery. One of them wears a plain wool cloak, his face hidden under the hood. Subtle. Except for the gold ring glinting in the lamplight and the way he keeps loudly whispering, "No one must recognize me." You can almost hear history judging him. He's here to observe the moral decay of the lower classes, for research purposes, of course. Across the room, two young patricians compete to see who can spend more. They're the Roman equivalent of rich kids on vacation, casually throwing denarii like confetti. One demands a poet to recite love verses mid-encounter. The other asks for grapes not to eat, just to throw dramatically at the ceiling. Neither of them will remember this night, but the workers will remember the cleanup. In the corner, a pair of sailors share a pitcher of wine and debate theology. One insists Neptune is the true god of love. The other points out that Neptune once turned himself into a dolphin for a date, which feels like a red flag. Their argument ends when a goat ambles through the doorway, bleating proudly, as if auditioning for attention. No one moves. The goat is a regular. It knows the floor plan. You notice that the atmosphere here doesn't follow Rome's usual hierarchy. Outside, class defines everything: where you walk, who you talk to, even what you wear. But inside the lupanar, the toga and the tunic sit side by side. Power melts under candlelight. Here, everyone's just a collection of nerves, desires, and very specific requests. Some clients are shy, they hover by the doorway, pretending they are lost, waiting for the leaner to take pity and match them with someone kind. Others are loud, drunk, and convinced they are irresistible. You watch one man attempt to seduce a courtesan with bad poetry. Your eyes are like olives, salty, round, and he forgets the last word. She gently suggests expensive. There are lovers too, real ones somehow. A regular client who brings the same worker flowers every week, whispering promises he probably can to keep. Their affection isn't loud or dramatic, but it's their quiet, awkward, and real in a place built on performance. Even here, in the empire of indulgence, the heart sneaks in like a thief. Meanwhile, the madame observes everything. She knows who pays well, who owes too much, who cries afterward. She spots a senator slipping an extra coin to his favourite courtesan and makes a mental note, a little insurance policy for later. Information is the true currency here, and she's richer than the emperor. As the night stretches on, the room becomes a microcosm of Rome, itself loud, chaotic, glittering, and slightly damp. A drunken soldier sings a love song to the wrong woman. A senator snores against the wall, his dignity evaporated. A merchant negotiates a discount and loses twice as much. The goat somehow finds a piece of lettuce and becomes the most successful creature in the building. You realize that for all their wealth and titles, Rome's great men come here seeking the same thing everyone does: to be seen, to be touched, to forget who they are for a while. And the lupanar, in its smoky, candlelit honesty, offers that for a price. By dawn, the last stragglers stagger out into the street, their sandals slapping on wet stone. The workers clean up, sweeping coins and wine-soaked petals from the floor. The goat leaves, unimpressed. The air cools. And just like that, the empire resets, ready to pretend this night never happened. But the leaner will remember. The walls will remember. And maybe, in the way only gossip can survive time, Rome itself will whisper it forever. A few copper coins could buy you a quick encounter about the price of a loaf of bread, and slightly less satisfying. Luxury courtesans charged in gold, offering poetry, politics, and pillow talk. The empire's economy ran on conquest, taxes and tips left on nightstands. You stand in the dim light of the lupanar, watching coins pass from hand to hand with the grace of a well-practiced ritual. This is Rome, where money is the only true love language. Every sigh, every smile, every artful glance has a price tag. The walls have seen more economic activity than the Senate, and the returns are much better. At the low end, you could find what the Romans called meretrices de taberna, the common workers of the trade. They operated in cellars so small you could touch both walls if you sneezed. Their price: 2 asses, maybe 3 on a busy night. A quick, practical exchange, often over before the oil lamp finished flickering. Economical, efficient, emotionally devastating. Then there were the Lupe she-wolves who worked the streets, often outside the city gates or near the circus grounds. They charged even less. No walls, no beds, no frescoes, just the open air, a blanket and a prayer that it didn't rain. For them, survival wasn't measured in pleasure, but in how many coins they could gather before sunrise. But climb the ladder, and things get interesting. Some courtesans known as delicate didn't just sell their bodies, they sold the illusion of intimacy. These were educated women, trained in music, poetry, conversation and manipulation. A night with one of them could cost a month's salary for a soldier, and he'd leave thinking she truly loved him. Spoiler, she didn't. But she did appreciate his generous tipping habits. You might meet a courtesan of renown, the type who attends dinner parties with senators, quotes Virgil between courses, and can recite your horoscope while adjusting her jewellery. Her clients were the elite generals, governors, the occasional emperor. She didn't wait for customers, she received them. Payment came not just in coins but in villas, jewellery, and occasionally political leverage. These women didn't just survive the empire, they profited from it. The Lena kept meticulous accounts of all this. Her wax tablets listed rates, expenses, and which regulars were late on payments. She'd remind you that even love requires bookkeeping. Some clients tried to haggle, which usually went as well as you'd expect. 2 denarii, she'd repeat sweetly. Then 2 minutes. The economy of affection is unyielding. You glance toward a doorway, where a soldier nervously counts coins in his hand. He's been saving for weeks, not for bread, not for wine, but for a few minutes of feeling like someone cares. The courtesan sees it too. She takes his hand, not kindly, but gently, as if she's seen this story 1,000 times. And she has, every night, the same longing, the same loneliness disguised as luxury. The wealthy treated brothels as entertainment. The poor treated them as escape. Everyone, in some way, was paying to forget, and the prices reflected that, from the copper sighs of the desperate to the golden laughter of the privileged. Rome's brothels were a mirror of the empire's economy, unequal, extravagant, and held together by illusion. You overhear 2 clients arguing in the corner, one bragging about spending a fortune on a courtesan who quoted philosophy mid-seduction, the other insisting that simplicity is better. Their debate grows philosophical until one of them admits he couldn't afford the philosophy girl anyway. They drink to equality in theory, at least. Even the gods got their cut. Offerings to Venus were expected, a few extra coins for divine blessing or cosmic protection from awkward infections. In a city where every transaction involved superstition, tipping wasn't just polite, it was insurance. And then there were the gifts. Jewellery, perfume, silk scarves from the East tokens meant to buy affection, or at least good reviews carved into the wall. Some courtesans kept these treasures hidden, tiny trophies of survival. Others sold them, practical as ever. Love fades, but gold holds value. By dawn the counting begins. The Lena tallies profits, the workers stash their earnings in secret corners, and the empire turns its golden gears once more. The senators wake with hangovers, the merchants with empty purses, the soldiers with guilty smiles. And Rome, always pragmatic, shrugs and gets back to business. You stand there a moment longer, listening to the clink of coins and the soft laughter echoing through the corridors. It is strange for all its indulgence. The Lupanar feels less like a den of sin and more like a factory of survival. Every transaction is a story, every payment a piece of someone's endurance, because in the end, the prices of passion were never really about pleasure. They were about power, need, and the quiet math of staying, alive in a world where everything, even affection, came with a receipt. Let's be honest, cleanliness was theoretical, water was a luxury, and soap was made from goat fat and hope. The walls might glisten with frescoes, but the air glistened with bacteria. You've never appreciated modern deodorant more than right now. The phrase smells like Rome was not a compliment. You take a deep breath, instantly regret it, and remind yourself that this is the ancient world, where personal hygiene was more of a personality trait than a practice. The air is thick with the scent of oil, sweat, wine, and ambition, somewhere between earthy and catastrophic. a place where incense and perfume weren't luxuries, they were survival tactics. The Romans did bathe, just not the way you think. Public baths existed. Yes, huge, echoing halls of marble and steam where people gathered to gossip, gamble, and occasionally clean something. But soap wasn't the star of the show. Instead, they'd slather themselves in olive oil, then scrape it off with a bronze blade called a strigil. It is like exfoliating with salad dressing. You imagine doing this after a night in the lupanar, it's less spa day, more vinaigrette. Inside the brothel, things were improvisational. The courtesans used whatever they could to stay fresh: rosewater, vinegar, crushed herbs, even ashes. Anything to cover the smell of sweat and old wine. One of them spritzes herself with a concoction of lavender and myrrh so strong it could knock out a legionary. She smiles sweetly and says, "It hides the men." You believe her. The beds, if you can call them that, are stone slabs with straw mattresses. The straw is replaced sometimes, though sometimes in Rome could mean annually. The workers shake it out daily, sweep the floor, and light incense near the doorway. Not for the gods, but for the noses. You suspect Venus herself would hesitate to bless this place without holding her breath. There's a small basin in the corner where water sits still and reflective. You lean over it, see your face distorted by oil and dust, and realize why Roman sculptures always look so clean, because no one else did. Water had to be carried in jars from the nearest fountain, and it wasn't exactly Evian. The city's aqueducts were a marvel, sure, but they didn't deliver to brothels. Priorities, apparently. Still, there's a kind of grim order to it. The Lena insists on wiping down surfaces and burning herbs between clients. She learned long ago that an outbreak of something unpleasant is bad for business. There's no medical understanding of germs, of course, but there is an instinct that bad smells mean bad luck. In Rome, superstition was as close to science as you could get. Perfume merchants made a fortune off this paranoia. Their shops lined the streets near the brothels, selling little clay bottles of myrrh, frankincense, and rose oil. Courtesans would spend a quarter of their earnings just to smell less like despair. Some perfumes were so potent they doubled as mosquito repellent, love potion, and probably mild poison. You pass a client who's doused himself in wine to mask the smell of sweat. It is not working. He smells like someone spilled a vineyard on a corpse, but he's proud of his effort, and honestly, so are you. Hygiene in Rome isn't about being clean. It's about not losing the olfactory war. Even the air outside doesn't help. The streets reek of wet stone, horse manure, fish guts, and the ghost of yesterday's garbage fire. It is a city that smells alive, alarmingly so. You remember that this is the same civilization that invented aqueducts, concrete, and underfloor heating, yet somehow didn't invent soap that didn't smell like goats. You watch a worker carefully clean a lamp with wine-soaked cloth, humming softly. There's something oddly tender about it, this small act of care in a place where care is rare. She sprinkles herbs on the floor, sweeping away dust with deliberate rhythm. It's ritualistic, almost meditative. You realize that even in filth, humans search for grace. A philosopher once claimed that dirt is simply matter out of place. If that's true, then this brothel is matter very, very out of place. Yet here, among the grime and sweat, people still laugh, flirt, dream. It is proof that comfort is relative, and that the human nose can adapt to almost anything given enough denial. You step toward the doorway, craving fresh air. Though that's a generous phrase in Rome. The night breeze drifts in, carrying the faint scent of baking bread from a nearby tavern. For a fleeting moment, it almost smells clean. Then someone sneezes behind you, and reality returns. Hygiene, in ancient Rome, wasn't about purity, it was about survival, about pretending you didn't notice. They didn't need to smell good, they needed to keep going. And somehow, despite the odds, they did. So the next time your shower water turns cold, remember this moment. Remember the goat fat, the sweat, the olive oil scrubbing ritual. Remember that once upon a time, a civilization built an empire without deodorant, and yet Rome still conquered the world, probably because no one wanted to get close enough to fight them. Oil lamps flickered all night, painting bodies in golden light and smoke. Shadows danced across the walls, and the scent of burning olive oil mixed with incense and perfume. The light was flattering mostly because it was dim enough to hide everyone's regrets. You look up at the ceiling, where the smoke from hundreds of tiny flames curls like lazy ghosts, clinging to the stone. Each lamp is small, a simple clay dish filled with oil, a bit of linen wick curling out like a question mark. They hiss softly when lit, the sound somewhere between a sigh and a secret. The light they cast is warm, unsteady, and kind. You suddenly realize everyone looks better by oil lamp, even history. The lamps never really go out. As soon as one burns low, someone refills it. Usually one of the workers, moving silently through the rooms with a jug of olive oil, the same kind people cook with, though here it serves a very different appetite. She tips it carefully. The flame sputters back to life, and for a moment, everything feels eternal. The glow hits the frescoes in a way that makes them shimmer reds and golds alive again, as though the painted figures are leaning forward to join the conversation. The walls seem to breathe. Every so often a breeze sneaks in through the cracks, and the shadows jump, performing their own silent pantomime of Rome's restless desires. You sit for a moment, letting your eyes adjust. The air feels thick, not unpleasant, just full of heat, of smoke, of life. The light makes everyone a story. The courtesan leaning against the wall becomes a goddess carved in bronze. The old merchant, his head bowed in post-indulgence, looks almost noble. Even the goat, yes, it is back again, appears majestic, outlined in sacred glow like a minor pastoral deity. There is something oddly peaceful about it all. Outside Rome is chaos wheels clattering over cobblestone, drunks shouting about gladiators, dogs barking at the moon. But here, the light wraps around everything like a whisper. You could almost forget the filth, the noise, the commerce of it all. The lupanar in the soft gold haze becomes something else entirely not shameful, but human. You notice how the lamps cluster one near the shrine of Venus, flickering reverently, another by the Lena S. desk, illuminating her ledger like a sacred text. Even sin needs bookkeeping. The workers tend their lamps like pets. They name them, talk to them, curse them when they smoke too much. In a world where fire means safety, a flame is a companion. There is also a certain level of danger. Olive oil burns hot, and these lamps are not OSHA approved. A careless sleeve, a drunken stumble, and suddenly the room could go from warm to inferno in seconds. But the Romans weren't bothered by risk. This is a people who seasoned their wine with lead and called it a delicacy. A few scorched curtains, hardly worth concern. Still, you can imagine the hush that falls each time a lamp sputters out. The sudden dark, the collective pause. Someone leans over, relights it from a neighbor-s flame, and life continues, a tiny ritual repeated 1,000 times a night. It is comforting in a strange way. The certainty that light, however small, always comes back. You pick up one of the lamps, tracing the thumbprint left by whoever made it. It is roughly molded, imperfect, eternal. You realize this same light, this exact kind of glow once touched emperors, poets, thieves, and lovers alike. All of them, for a few soft hours, illuminated by the same golden warmth. A philosopher once wrote that fire is the soul of the universe. Here, it is the soul of survival. The lamp burns, the shadows sway, and the night feels infinite. People whisper, laugh, make promises they'll forget by dawn, and through it all, the flames keep watch. Outside, the stars glitter over the Tiber, but inside, the oil lamps are brighter, closer, more intimate. They turn every curve, every line, every sigh into art. Rome is built on spectacle, but this is the quiet version of it. The empire condensed into one trembling flame that refuses to die out. As the night deepens, the lamps keep burning low, steady, stubborn. They outlast the laughter, the gossip, even the pleasure. When dawn creeps through the shutters, their smoke mingles with the new day, carrying whispers of the night before into the waking city. You step out into the pale morning air, and behind you the lamps still glow faintly little stars trapped in clay, guardians of the ancient dark. And for a moment you understand why they never went out, because the Romans weren't afraid of the dark, they were afraid of what they might see if the lights went off. Every brothel had a shrine, often to Venus or Priapus, the god with more confidence than sense. Offerings of wine, flowers, and coins piled up beside anatomically impressive statues. Clients prayed for luck. Workers prayed for kind customers. The gods, of course, did nothing except watch. You spot the shrine tucked into a corner, half hidden behind a curtain that has seen better centuries. It is small, barely more than a niche in the wall, but it radiates importance. There she is, Venus herself, carved in smooth marble, draped in stone that somehow manages to be both modest and very much not. Her gaze is calm, patient, and, if you look long enough, a little judgmental. You can almost hear her thinking, "Again? You people never rest." Next to her stands Priapus, the god of fertility, gardens, and other flourishing things. He's carved from terracotta, his grin somewhere between proud and menacing. He looks like the sort of deity who would give terrible advice at a party. Every Roman brothel had one of these statues, standing guard like the world's least subtle security system. His purpose? To bless the business, ward off bad luck, and remind everyone that modesty was for other people. The offerings pile up at their feet. Wilted garlands, copper coins, a slice of bread, a few drops of wine. One enthusiastic patron has even left a sausage, which feels both sincere and on theme. The air smells faintly of incense and old prayers. You can sense the hope here, quiet, tired hope. The workers touch the altar before starting their night, fingers brushing the cool stone for protection. They don't expect miracles, just maybe a good client, decent pay, and no broken promises. Clients stop by too, often awkwardly, muttering half-hearted prayers under their breath. "Venus, goddess of love, grant me endurance," one whispers, "and perhaps discretion." He drops a coin into the bowl, then immediately looks guilty, as though Venus might invoice him later. Another man asks Priapus for success. You're not sure what that means, but given the statue's smirk, you suspect he's asking for too much. It is strange for all the sin there. A kind of reverence here. The Romans never separated pleasure from divinity. Lust wasn't evil. It was sacred biology. The gods themselves loved, cheated, and made terrible romantic decisions. Jupiter alone had enough affairs to fill an entire season of bad reality TV. So for the Romans, why hide what the heavens celebrated so openly? You watch as a worker lights a fresh stick of incense, the smoke curling upward like a whispered confession. She murmurs something in Greek, eyes closed. Maybe it's a prayer, maybe a curse. The line between the two is thin. The flame flickers, the scent deepens, and for a moment, the lupanar feels less like a brothel and more like a temple, one dedicated to the worship of survival. The Lena appears briefly, adjusting a garland on Venus' arm, making sure the statue looks presentable. Even gods have to maintain appearances. She mutters, "Keep business good tonight," and drops a coin into the offering bowl. A small investment in cosmic customer service. Of course, not everyone takes the shrine seriously. A young soldier winks at the statue of Venus as he walks past. "Wish me luck," he says, grinning. The lamplight catches the curve of her marble mouth, and for a split second you could swear she's smirking back. Then again, maybe that's just the wine fumes. The presence of Priapus, however, is impossible to ignore. He stands there proudly, forever frozen in self-confidence, a reminder that Rome didn't blush easily. His image appeared everywhere: gardens, fountains, doorways, not out of obscenity, but protection. Romans believed laughter drove away evil spirits, and Priapus guaranteed at least one kind of laughter. So in a sense, this was divine comedy. You crouch to examine the small offerings left at the base of the shrine. Among the coins, you find a carved ivory heart, a scrap of ribbon, and what looks suspiciously like a tooth. The stories behind them are unknowable, but you can feel them: fragments of lives that pass through, moments of desperation and gratitude mingled together. Each gift says the same thing: please, let tomorrow be kind. A gentle hush settles over the room. The lamps flicker, the air shimmers, and even the laughter from the next chamber fades to a hum. For just a heartbeat, the lupanar feels ancient in the truest sense, a sacred space where the living and divine coexisted, both slightly disappointed in each other. Then the moment breaks. Someone sneezes, a cup shatters, the world resumes. The gods, as ever, remain silent and mildly entertained. You take one last look at Venus and Priapus, glowing in the lamplight. They've seen everything: the laughter, the tears, the bargains, the lies. 2,000 years later, they are still watching, still listening, still collecting offerings from mortals, trying to make sense of desire. And maybe that is the point. In Rome, even sin needed a god to bless it. Because when you live in an empire built on power and pleasure, someone up there has to keep score. From your small stone cubicle, you hear laughter, murmurs, and the rhythmic creak of wooden beds. Outside, the city howls, carriages rumbling, dogs barking, someone vomiting poetry. It's chaos, but somehow comforting. Rome never truly slept. It just changed rhythm. You close your eyes and let the city's nocturnal orchestra play. It begins softly, a background hum of sandals slapping wet cobblestone, the distant splash of a fountain, a drunk man reciting Ovid to a very unimpressed cat. The air is thick with heat, music, and the unmistakable sound of someone haggling about something that definitely shouldn't require negotiation. This isn't just noise, it's civilization at full volume. Inside the lupanar, the soundscape shifts. Whispered conversations float through the stone walls, some tender, some purely transactional, all slightly absurd. You hear a woman laughing, the kind of laugh that sounds rehearsed but still sincere enough to fool a tipsy senator. Then, from another room, the soft thump-thump-thump of a bed frame keeping time like a metronome set to uncomfortable pace. If Apple Music existed, the playlist would be called Rhythms of Regret, Roman Edition. You can tell the class of the clientele just by the noises they make. The sailors are loud, raucous laughter, clinking cups, the occasional burp that could register on the Richter scale. The merchants hum to themselves while counting coins, the patricians. They whisper too much, always with that anxious tone that says, if anyone asks, I was at the temple. Then there's the city itself, rumbling beyond the door like a living creature. The rattle of wagon wheels over uneven streets, the chorus of stray dogs declaring territorial war, the faraway clatter of amphorae being loaded onto carts for the morning markets. Rome is never quiet, even at 3 a.m. It's an empire with insomnia. Somewhere nearby, a street performer plays a reed flute, the notes wandering off-key but heartfelt. The melody snakes through the air, mixing with laughter, sighs, and the faint sizzling of oil lamps. It's not beautiful exactly, but it's alive, the sound of a city that refuses to shut up, even when it's supposed to be sleeping. The workers of the lupanar add their own verses to this nightly symphony. Someone hums as she braids her hair. Another sings softly under her breath an old song from her homeland, the tune rising above the noise like a fragile prayer. You can almost imagine what she's dreaming of. Quiet hills, clean air, a life where night doesn't mean survival. In the next room, a client snores loudly, probably dreaming of gods forgiving him for everything that just happened. A courtesan sighs, amused. "You call that divine?" she mutters. Her voice is half laughter, half exhaustion. You can't help but smile. Even here, humour survives. Every few minutes, a door creaks open, a lamp is refilled, footsteps shuffle down the hall. The Lena S. voice carries faintly from her corner low, commanding, unbothered. She could probably run the entire city with that tone alone. The creak of the ledger table blends with the soft ringing of coins, the eternal music of Roman capitalism. And through it all, the smell of burning olive oil hangs in the air, faintly sweet, faintly smoky, the scent of endurance. Each flicker of light throws new shadows, each whisper another story half told. You realize that the lupanar at night isn't just a building, it is an organism. Breathing, sighing, surviving. Outside, a donkey brays at something only donkeys understand. A man yells back as if debating philosophy with it. Somewhere, a pottery vendor drops his wares and curses Mars himself. Rome's soundtrack is one long improv session, and everyone is a contributor, willing or not. You shift on the straw mattress, listening closer. Beneath the chaos, there is a strange harmony. The rhythm of footsteps, the pulse of voices, the heartbeat of the city. It's messy, human, and deeply soothing in its own dysfunctional way. Rome doesn't need silence to rest. It finds peace in its noise the way a river finds peace in its own current. As dawn creeps closer, the noises begin to change. The laughter quiets, the creaks slow, the flute fades. Somewhere, a rooster or an overly confident citizen calls out to the morning. The dogs go quiet, the wagons pause, and for a fleeting moment, the city exhales. You hear the whisper of brooms sweeping the streets, a sign that night has officially clocked out. You sit there, bathed in the golden half-light of dying lamps, and realize how strangely beautiful it all is, this imperfect music of survival. Every sound tells the same story, that Rome, in all its filth and glory, refused to stop living. And just as you start to drift towards sleep, you hear one last sound, faint but clear, a drunk poet in the alley, slurring his way through a love poem to someone named Cornelia. You thief of sandals. It's terrible. It's sincere. It's perfect. Rome never truly slept. It just whispered its dreams out loud. Perfume was both armor and illusion. Workers drenched themselves in myrrh, cinnamon, and rose oil, all to cover the smell of humanity. A good perfume could turn heads, distract from unwashed tunics, or convince a drunk senator that you were descended from Venus herself. Spoiler, you weren't he. This scent hits you the moment you walk back into the lupanar, not one perfume, but a war of them. It's a battlefield of aromas where frankincense duels with cinnamon, myrrh locks horns with musk, and somewhere in the background, a note of desperation ties it all together. The air is heavy, sweet, and slightly nauseating, like being hugged by a potpourri salesman who's lying about his past. Rome adored perfume. It was one of the few luxuries that crossed class lines. Everyone, from patricians to street vendors, wanted to smell better than their environment. In a city where the streets smelled like wet marble, goat droppings, and existential dread, fragrance wasn't indulgence, it was survival. But in the brothels, it became something more a weapon, a marketing strategy, a mood stabilizer. You watch as a courtesan dips a fingertip into a small alabaster jar and dabs oil behind her ears. The gesture is slow, practiced, ritualistic. "This one is from Arabia," she says with the faintest smile. "Smells like gold and bad decisions." Another worker rolls her eyes. "Smells like debt." They laugh. But the truth lingers, these tiny bottles cost more than a week's wages. Every drop burned away on the promise of appearing divine. Perfume vendors unguentari thrived off this economy of illusion. Their stalls lined the narrow alleys near the lupernaria, their tables cluttered with glass vials and carved ivory boxes. "Imported from Egypt," they'd shout, waving tiny jars of oil that had probably never seen the Nile. The good stuff really did come from the East resins from Arabia, balsam from Judea, and roses so strong they could make an amphitheatre smell like a bridal suite. The bad stuff? Well, let us just say if you mixed goat fat and hope, you'd get something close. You pass one of the workers holding a clay bottle the size of her thumb. She uncorks it and the air blooms warm, floral, dizzying. "Want to smell like a goddess?" she teases. You nod politely and she grins. "Too bad. There's only enough for me." She's joking, but also not. Perfume is personal. It is armor she can share. Clients notice too. The wealthy ones prefer certain scents: sandalwood for sophistication, rose for romance, cinnamon for adventure, and civet for people who hate other people's noses. Some come in just to buy the oils, smearing them over their togas so their wives will think they spent the night at a temple. Everyone in Rome is lying. Some just smell nicer doing it. The irony, of course, is that most of these perfumes were made from the same base: rancid animal fat. The more expensive the scent, the better the masking agent. So when a Roman said, "You smell divine," what he really meant was, "You smell slightly less like decay." Progress is relative. Still, for the workers, the perfume meant power. It transformed them. The right scent could make a man forget her accent, her chains, or the reality of the room around them. It was her disguise, her sales pitch, and her prayer all at once. She could become whoever he wanted her to be: a goddess, a queen, a myth. For a few minutes, the oil did the talking. You noticed the shrine of Venus flickering in the background, its marble gleaming under the haze of incense. Even the goddess of love is surrounded by smoke and scent. Like she too understands the importance of presentation. The whole room feels suspended in perfume, a haze that hides truth and softens edges. As the night deepens, the air thickens further. Every movement stirs a new wave of fragrance. A courtesan sweeps by, leaving a trail of cinnamon and clove. Another passes, and suddenly you're in a cloud of roses and smoke. The combination is dizzying, hypnotic, and weirdly comforting. It's the smell of work, of craft, of women surviving with grace in a world that offers them none. You think of how scent lingers longer than memory. Long after the laughter fades and the lamps go out, the perfume will remain in the cracks of the walls, in the straw of the beds, in the folds of discarded tunics. A ghost made of flowers and sweat, haunting history in the softest way. Outside, the cool air greets you, cleaner but somehow emptier. Rome smells of stone and dust, the perfume long behind you. But if you close your eyes, you can still trace it: a blend of spice, sweetness, and strength. The scent of survival disguised as seduction, because in the empire of desire, perfume wasn't just luxury, it was identity. And if Rome was built on power, it was also built on the illusion that everyone, for one night, could smell like a god. Prostitution was legal and taxed. Every worker's name was recorded in chalk-washable, but not forgettable. Bureaucrats loved their ledgers, and even in pleasure, Rome demanded paperwork. If you think modern taxes are invasive, imagine explaining your job to a Roman accountant. Because, yes, even in the dim, smoky heart of the lupanar, the empire's long, nosy arm still reached in, stylus first. Rome didn't just conquer land, it conquered spreadsheets, and the brothel was no exception. You could buy love, lust, and bad decisions here, but you could never buy your way out of the tax office. Every registered worker had to appear on the books, their names scrawled in red chalk on the aerarium, the official register of ladies of pleasure. Red was used because it stood out and also because it was the colour of both sin and bureaucracy, which Rome seemed to confuse often. The chalk made it look temporary, but the record lingered long after the lines were wiped clean. Nothing in Rome was truly erased, just refiled under mildly scandalous. Once a month, the vectigal collectors made their rounds. They were Rome's least romantic visitors, accountants with scrolls, ink-stained fingers, and the energy of men who believe foreplay is balancing a ledger. They'd stand at the doorway, squinting at the Lena S. books while she smiled through gritted teeth. 3 new girls? Very good. And the senator still visits twice a week, she'd say sweetly, just to make them blush. The tax wasn't outrageous, usually a small percentage of earnings, but it came with the full glory of a Roman bureaucracy. Forms, seals, receipts, and the occasional bribe disguised as donations to Venus. The Lena kept everything in order because one missing entry could bring the magistrates knocking, and nobody wanted magistrates in a brothel. They had the charisma of a wet scroll and twice the stiffness. The system, like all Roman systems, was both efficient and absurd. Officially, prostitution was a legal trade. Unofficially, it was treated like a moral sneeze. Acknowledged, tolerated, but preferably done quietly. Workers had to register with the aedile, the public official in charge of, well, public decency, which is a bit like putting a cat in charge of a fish market. He'd jot down their names, ages, places of origin, and sometimes the price of their services, all while pretending not to be interested. For the enslaved workers, the registration was to even theirs to complete. Their owners handled it, filing them like inventory. It's a horrifying thought that someone could be both human and taxable property at once, but that's Rome for you. An empire that could invent aqueducts and moral loopholes in the same week. Still, there was a strange sort of equality in it. Everyone paid their dues, courtesans, madams, and, in a few rare cases, men who worked the trade. The state didn't discriminate when there was money involved. If you were earning, you were taxable. If you were sinning, you were profitable. You can almost imagine the conversation in the tax office. So, what's your occupation? Professional worshipper Venus. Ah, independent or under management. Mostly self-employed, but there's an organizational structure. Excellent. Please sign here and remember, late payments incur divine penalties. The Lena, of course, had her own creative accounting. A few coins slipped into the right hands kept inspectors happy and reports vague. Sometimes she'd register fewer workers than she actually employed, claiming the rest were decorative staff or musicians. It was half fraud, half performance art, and entirely Roman. Even the temples got involved. Some brothels paid small offerings to Venus or Priapus in exchange for divine leniency, a kind of celestial tax write-off. May the goddess forgive us our ledgers, one priest once joked, though probably not out loud. But for the workers themselves, the red chalk was a scar. Once registered, you were marked for life. You couldn't marry a citizen, hold property, or claim respectability again. The chalk washed off the wall, but not off your name. And that's the cruel irony. The empire that taxed your labour also denied you legitimacy. You were both vital and invisible. Still, they found humour in it. One courtesan joked that her tax bill was the only love letter she ever received, Another claimed she'd bribed a scribe to write her name twice so she'd seem more in demand. Even bureaucracy couldn't crush Roman wit. As the night winds down, the Lena closes her ledger with a thud, blowing out the lamp beside it. Outside, the city murmurs. The accountant sleeps soundly, dreaming of numbers, and the women of the lupanar, exhausted, perfumed, paid, and filed away in red chalk, prepare to do it all again tomorrow. Because in Rome, even passion was audited, and somewhere, in a dusty archive of the empire, there is still a line in faded red chalk that says, Chloris 3 denarii, taxable income paid in full. Some emperors were discreet patrons. Others, like Caligula, redefined casual visit. He famously hosted orgies as political strategy, because apparently nothing says stable leadership like mandatory nudity. In the empire, sex wasn't scandalous. Pretending you didn't enjoy it was. You hear whispers ripple through the lupanar before you even see him. The emperor's coming. Those 3 words could mean a triumphal parade or a public disaster, often both at once. Because when Rome's most powerful man decided to relax, it wasn't a private affair. It was national theatre with better lighting and worse decisions. The Lena scrambles into action, straightening garlands, ordering fresh incense, and hissing at a worker to hide the cheap wine. You can feel the shift in the air, excitement tinged with terror. Hosting an emperor was like hosting a volcano, glamorous, unpredictable, and best survived from a distance. Caligula, if the rumors are true, never just visited a brothel. He turned the palace into one. He would line up senators' wives, declare them available for public service, and then charge men for the privilege using the profits to fund his horse-s future political career. Somewhere between madness and marketing genius, he essentially invented state-sponsored chaos. When he did appear in an actual lupanar, it wasn't quietly. His entourage would storm in like a parade that got lost guards, musicians, and a priest to make it officially blessed. The emperor would arrive wearing something that could only be described as too much: gold cloak, jewels, maybe a crown made entirely of ego. The patrons froze, the workers curtsied, and the Lena tried to look pleased instead of mortally stressed. He'd walk through the rooms like a man inspecting his own empire, which, technically, he was. Fine work, he'd say approvingly to the courtesans as if they were marble statues. Excellent craftsmanship. Then, inevitably, he'd declare a contest. Let us see who pleases the gods most creatively, because nothing screams divine approval like an imperial talent show in a dimly lit brothel. For other emperors, visits were subtler but no less hypocritical. Augustus publicly promoted morality laws to curb immorality, all while discreetly keeping his own favourite courtesans. Nero, never one to do things halfway, reportedly performed songs mid-encounter, which must have been awkward for everyone involved. Claudius preferred quiet arrangements, though his wife, Messalina, had her own full-time gig competing with the city as sex workers. According to historians, who were definitely gossiping, she once challenged the best prostitute in Rome to a contest and won by endurance. Rome really did take competition seriously. The emperor's patronage of the lupanaria wasn't just personal, it was political. In a society where pleasure equaled power, being seen as indulgent meant being seen as alive. Senators hosted dinner orgies to prove status. Emperors attended them to prove dominance. A night in a brothel wasn't a secret shame, it was a performance of Roman vitality. And yet, there were rules. Certain emperors preferred their visits discreetly handled, no announcements, no parades, no poets writing odes about it later. Tiberius, for example, kept his escapades offshore at his villa on Capri, which historians later described as a moral sinkhole. That ancient historian code for Even we don't want to describe what happened there. The workers in the Lupanar knew all this, of course. They'd seen senators and soldiers, gods and ghosts. Emperors were just one more flavor of man trying to forget his responsibilities. When Caligula finally left, the brothel would hum again, half relieved, half dazed. The leaner would count the coins he'd tossed, probably more than enough to replace anything he'd broken, which was everything. The next morning, Rome would gossip. Did you hear? The emperor visited the Subra district again. No. Yes. And he tipped in gold. Well, he is the economy. The moralists would clutch their scrolls, the poets would sharpen their quills, and the city would move on, satisfied that even its rulers were human disastrously, hilariously human. Because here's the thing. In ancient Rome, power and pleasure weren't opposites. They were intertwined, like ivy around marble. To rule an empire was to indulge it. The emperors knew that. The people knew that. Only history pretends to be shocked. So when you picture Caligula reclining in a lupanar, surrounded by perfume and chaos, remember, he wasn't just being decadent. He was performing Rome, its hunger, its confidence, its utter lack of shame. And if that doesn't make you feel better about your last bad decision, nothing will. A few women rose above it all like Volumnia Cytheris, the actress and courtesan who enchanted generals and poets. They wielded beauty like a weapon and intellect like armor. In a society run by men, they learned how to rule without a throne. You sit in the half-light of the lupanar, surrounded by the fading laughter of the night, and wonder how anyone could rise from this world of incense, sweat, and survival. But Rome, in all its contradictions, loved a good scandal, and nothing scandalized the city more than a woman who refused to stay in her assigned place. Volumnia Cytheris was one of those women. Born enslaved, trained as an actress, and later freed, she moved through the city like a rumor that refused to die. On stage, she played goddesses and heroines. Off stage, she performed something even riskier independence. She was the mistress of Mark Antony himself, long before Cleopatra stole the headlines. Poets wrote about her, gossip carved her name into history. She was just admired, she was feared in that specific way men fear clever women with good posture. Her story wasn't unique. Others followed paths just as dazzling and dangerous. There was Flora, who reportedly charged senators more. Then they paid their soldiers and hosted her own games in honor of spring a festival so wild that the Senate tried and failed to ban it. There was Rhodope of Thrace, a courtesan so rich she built her own pyramid because apparently the ultimate revenge is real estate. And there was Phryne, the Greek courtesan who was so beautiful that when she was put on trial for impiety, her lawyer simply tore off her robe in front of the jury. She was acquitted instantly. Rome learned that lesson well. Beauty was a legal defense. The courtesans who became legends understood something their clients never did, that the real currency wasn't a gold, it was influence. They whispered in the ears of poets, philosophers, and politicians. They decided who received favor, who fell from grace, and who got a discreet warning before disaster struck. Behind every speech in the forum, there was probably a conversation that began on silk sheets. Volumnia herself became a muse. Cicero, who tried to hide his fascination with her behind very moral letters, once called her dangerously charming, which is ancient Roman for I can just stop thinking about her, and I hate that. She was invited to dinner parties, poetry readings, and even the occasional Senate gossip session. Of course, she was never allowed to sit at the table, only near it. That was Romy's version of feminism. You can inspire the empire, but don't expect a chair. Still, she played the game perfectly. She knew how to flatter without submission, how to charm without surrender. She learned that wit was a weapon sharper than any senator's tongue. When men tried to reduce her to rumour, she became myth instead. And myths, inconveniently, are hard to tax. You imagine her walking through the streets, head high, silk trailing in the dust, perfume thick in the air. The same men who sneered at her in daylight would send gifts after dark poems, jewellery, letters sealed with trembling hands. She'd open them all, smile, and decide which offer was worth her time. She wasn't selling herself anymore. She was selling access. The Romans called women like her meretriers honeste respectable courtesans, which is an oxymoron if there ever was one. They weren't a part of polite society, but they shaped it anyway. They were invited everywhere, blamed for everything, and remembered forever. Even centuries later, playwrights and poets still borrowed their stories, sometimes flattering, sometimes cruel, always fascinated. Because these women did the impossible. They made themselves unforgettable in a world that preferred them invisible. You glance around the brothel, imagining one of them sitting where you are now, maybe centuries earlier, brushing perfume on her wrists, practicing a smile that could topple empires. She didn't have freedom, not really, but she had power, and in Rome, that was close enough. By dawn, the courtesans who became legends would vanish back into myth, their names softened by time but never erased, their portraits faded, their lovers forgotten, but their laughter, that sharp, knowing laugh, echoes through every marble hallway that tried to silence them. Because in a world ruled by men, they found a different throne, one built from secrets, poetry, and the sheer audacity of surviving beautifully. Latin was flexible grammatically and otherwise. Flirtation took the form of witty puns, double meanings, and graffiti poetry. The walls of Pompeii are covered in love notes that range from sweet to unspeakably filthy. It is humanity at its most honest and least spell-checked. You lean against the cool stone wall of the lupanar, squinting at a patch of graffiti. At first glance, it looks like random scratches. Then, as your eyes adjust, the messages reveal themselves like whispered confessions preserved in lime and ash. One reads, "Successus loves Iris, the freed woman of the innkeeper." Another, less romantic, "I screwed the barmaid. Everyone did. It's not Shakespeare, but it is sincere." The Romans didn't write love letters. They carved them into eternity. Every brothel, bathhouse, and alleyway was a Twitter feed of emotion, joy, lust, jealousy, and terrible spelling. Pompeii alone had over 11,000 pieces of graffiti. That's not an estimate. Archaeologists counted. Imagine dedicating your life to ancient studies, only to spend your days translating Lucius was here, and he was excellent. Language, for the Romans, was foreplay. They loved wordplay almost as much as they loved wine. A pun could be flirtatious, dangerous, or deeply inappropriate sometimes all at once. A good one might earn you a laugh. A great one could earn you a night. In a world without emojis, wit was your best pickup line. The courtesans naturally mastered this art. They spoke multiple dialects: Greek, Latin, sometimes Aramaic or Egyptian, and wielded them like tools of seduction. A well-timed compliment in Latin could melt a merchant's ego. A teasing phrase in Greek could make a senator's knees go weak. It wasn't just language, it was strategy. If charm was currency, these women were multilingual bankers. You overhear a courtesan murmuring to her client, her words lilting and slow. "Amor vincit omnia," she whispers, "love conquers all." He sighs dramatically, clearly unaware that it's also graffiti D on half the walls in Pompeii, usually followed by "but it never pays rent." There's humour too, always humour. Romans couldn't resist a good dirty joke, and the lupanaria were living punchlines. One wall proclaims proudly, "At Nuceria, I broke 10 benches." Salvius was with me. Another boasts, Restitutus says, we were here together and we had a great time. You can almost feel the smug satisfaction of a man thinking he's immortal because he found a sharp rock and free time. Even the gods weren't as safe from innuendo. Someone scrawled, Priapus, protect my parts and my profits. Another wrote, Venus, if you love me, don't let my wife find out. The divine and the disastrous coexisted beautifully. For all their grandeur, their temples, their laws, their marble, the Romans were remarkably human. Their graffiti shows it. People falling in love, bragging, complaining about prices, leaving inside jokes. It's the same energy as online comments today, just with fewer emojis and more artistic commitment. You run your fingers over one inscription, tracing grooves left by someone else's hand 2,000 years ago. Gaius loves Julia. That's it. No poetry, no embellishment. Just a declaration, carved on a wall that outlasted them both. The volcano buried their city, but not their words. It is humbling, really all those lives, reduced to a few messy sentences that somehow say everything. Of course, not all inscriptions were sentimental, some were gloriously petty. Secundus defecated here twice, reads one wall. Another warns, beware of lovers they bite. The Romans documented affection, rivalry, and digestive triumphs with equal enthusiasm. History remembers emperors. The walls remember everyone else. The courtesans used this language too literally. Many would leave notes advertising themselves. Fortunata delights men nightly, or at Nicia S. Place, the best service in Pompeii. In an age without Yelp, you carved your own reviews. And just like today, there were trolls. Someone scrawled beneath one name, Don't believe her. She overcharges. 2,000 years later, the internet still hasn't evolved past that level of pettiness. It's strange, though comforting, even how much of this graffiti feels familiar. The spelling errors, the bravado, the yearning. Every scribble says the same thing. I was here. I felt something. Please remember me. You step back, the lamplight flickering across the walls. For a moment it feels as if the voices are still there, laughing, teasing, whispering secrets in a language that refuses to die. The Latin may be rough, the handwriting awful, but the emotion is perfect. Because in the end, desire doesn't need translation. Whether it's scratched on stone or sent by text at 2 a.m., the message is the same. I want, I hope, I was here. You wake before dawn, wash with cold water, paint your face with powdered lead, which, yes, will slowly kill you. You practice your smile in the mirror. You survive another day of strangers, coins, and conversations about love that have nothing to do with it. The air is heavy, that pre-sunrise stillness when even Rome seems to pause. You sit up on your straw mattress, bones creaking like the bed itself. Somewhere outside, a rooster screams at existence. You envy him the freedom to shout into the void and call it a job. Your room is small, but yours, sort of. A clay lamp, a chipped mirror, a few jars of oils and powders, and a comb missing 2 teeth. The walls are covered in faded frescoes, lovers, gods, reminders that the line between work and worship has always been blurry. You stretch, rub your eyes, and begin the ritual. The first task, wash. The water is cold enough to wake the dead, fetched from a cistern by the youngest worker, who's already half asleep. You splash it over your face and instantly regret every life choice that brought you to this moment. Hygiene may be optional in Rome, but appearances aren't. You dab rose water behind your ears more for hope than effect. Then comes the makeup. A thin dusting of white powder made from ground lead, the Roman equivalent of look alive. It gives you that pale, divine glow that says, I am beautiful and also possibly dying. A little rouge from crushed berries follows, and a touch of kohl to darken the eyes. You lean toward the mirror, whispering your morning affirmation. May today's clients be generous, sober, and short-winded. Outside, the Lena is already barking orders. She's been up for hours, counting coins and assigning shifts. You and the other women gather in the small common room, eating stale bread dipped in watered wine. Breakfast is brief. There's no time for reflection, only preparation. Someone hums a song from her homeland. Another adjusts her tunic straps. You all share the same resigned laughter, that universal sound of co-workers pretending it is fine. The door opens, and Rome floods in. The smell of fish markets, horse manure, and hot stone rushes through the narrow alleyways. Merchants shout. Soldiers march. Somewhere a child cries and a baker burns his first loaf. It's a city waking up, and you're part of the machinery that keeps it running, whether anyone admits it or not. By mid-morning, the first clients arrive, the early birds of debauchery. Some are nervous, some boastful, most forgettable. You smile on cue, laugh when required, and listen to the same tired stories. "My wife doesn't understand me," says one. You nod sympathetically, thinking, she probably understands you perfectly. That's the problem. There's rhythm to it, all the soft lighting, the murmurs, the occasional clink of coins on stone. Between visitors, you tidy the bed, reapply perfume, sip watered wine, and try not to think. Thinking too much here is dangerous. You learn to exist in fragments. A glance, a laugh, a practiced sigh. Around noon, you step outside for air. The sun beats down, the street alive with motion. Across the alley, a baker waves, a dog sleeps under a cart, and two boys argue over who gets to steal the next loaf. You watch the city like a play you've seen 1,000 times, familiar, predictable, but strangely comforting. Rome might be filthy, loud, and cruel, but it's alive. And that's something. Afternoon brings the regulars, the ones who know your name, or at least pretend to. They talk too much, drink too fast, and tip inconsistently. Some are kind, some try to be. You've learned not to expect much. You measure generosity not by coins, but by gentleness. One man always leaves a fig on the table for you, small, sweet, and unspoken gratitude. It's enough. As evening falls, the lamps are lit. The lupanar transforms again, smoke, shadows, and whispers. You reapply the paint, fix your hair, and prepare for the night shift. The Lena walks the hall like a general before battle. You nod to her, and she nods back. No words needed. Hours blur. Laughter turns to fatigue, and the air thickens with incense and exhaustion. You lose track of time, of faces, of yourself. Somewhere in the distance, a musician plays a reed flute, the same 3 notes over and over, as if the night itself needs background music. Finally, long after midnight, the last visitor leaves. You wipe your face with a damp cloth, watching the white lead streak down like war paint melting away. The mirror shows a tired woman with red eyes and a faint smile that's half real, half reflex. You whisper good night to Venus, not as a prayer, but as a habit. Outside, Rome hums on, restless even in darkness. You lie down, muscles aching, coins clutched in your palm. The lamp flickers, smoke curling up toward the ceiling. You close your eyes and let the sounds fade. Tomorrow you will do it all again, wash, paint, smile, survive. Because that's what Rome demands. Endurance disguised as beauty. And as you drift towards sleep, you realize somewhere between exhaustion and defiance that survival itself is its own kind of victory. Food was simple: bread, olives, wine, maybe a stolen fig if you were lucky. Brothel kitchens were loud, smoky, and smelled of garlic and gossip. Meals weren't romantic, but they were shared small moments of humanity in a place built on transaction. The day-s rush fades, replaced by the softer chaos of dinner. You follow the scent, smoky oil, stale bread, and something faintly burning to the small kitchen behind the lupanar. Kitchen is generous. It is really just a clay oven, a few cracked bowls, and a cat that has somehow achieved seniority. The air is thick with warmth and laughter. For a few brief hours, nobody as a courtesan, or a client, or a Lena with too many numbers in her head. You are just hungry Romans, waiting for bread that might actually bake this time. Someone else slicing olives, someone else pours cheap wine into clay. Cups. The Lena hovers nearby, pretending not to eavesdrop on the latest gossip, though everyone knows she is. Did you hear, one woman whispers, that the senator's wife visited last week? Another giggles. He said she came for the incense. Everyone laughs, because in Rome, sin and self-deception are practically family values. You sit down beside the fire, the warmth settling into your bones. Dinner isn't much a loaf split among four. A handful of olives, maybe a chunk of cheese if the Lena is feeling generous. Someone passes you a cup of wine that tastes faintly like vinegar and regret. You drink anyway. After a day of smiling for strangers, it tastes like relief. The conversation is easy, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the occasional crash of pottery. A younger worker brags about a client who swore she was the reincarnation of Venus. Did he pay extra for the divinity? Someone asks. No, she sighs, but he prayed afterward. Another rolls her eyes. Men only pray when they've done something worth apologizing for. The cat winds around your ankles, purring like it has seen things it can unsee. You tear off a piece of bread and toss it to him. In the flickering lamplight, his eyes glint gold, half animal, half deity. You wonder if he belongs to the brothel, or if he's just a local who's figured out that love and leftovers are equally plentiful here. One of the girls starts humming a tune from the east, slow and wistful. The others join in softly. Their voices blend with the crackle of fire and the hiss of wine spilled on hot clay. It is a fragile kind of peace, made of smoke and song and exhaustion. No one is pretending here, no one's performing, just breathing, eating, existing. The food disappears quickly, as if the act of eating might erase the day. Bread dipped in oil, olives popped between teeth, laughter swallowed with the last drops of wine. The taste isn't good, but it is familiar, and in Rome, familiarity is comfort. You glance around and realize this small kitchen, with its cracked bowls and weary faces, feels more like home than anywhere else in the city. After dinner, someone reads aloud from a bit of poetry she memorized, Catullus maybe, or something she half invented. Love is madness, she declares dramatically, waving her cup. Then why do we eat like sane people? Another replies. Laughter again, soft this time, tired, but real. The kind of laughter that only happens when you've seen too much and are too tired to care. The Lena eventually shoos everyone away. Sleep, she orders, though she's the last to go. You linger a moment longer, watching her scrape crumbs into a small pile. She doesn't eat with the rest of you, she never does, but she hums quietly as she works an old song, something from before her title and her ledgers. You catch her smiling for a moment, a rare, unguarded smile. Then it's gone, tucked back under duty. You step outside with your cup, looking up at the Roman night. The stars peek faintly through the haze of smoke and lamp glow. Somewhere nearby, a cart rattles over cobblestones. A dog barks at nothing. The city is alive, relentless and indifferent. But here, for a brief moment, you feel the smallest flicker of calm. You sip the last of the wine and think about how strange it is to find peace in a place built on performance. But here's what these meals are: tiny rebellions against the noise of the empire. Proof that even in the empire of lust and law, people still share bread, jokes, and warmth. Tomorrow will come more faces, more names, more noise. But for now, there is quiet. A half-empty cup, a full belly, and the soft sound of someone snoring down the hall. In Rome, survival didn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it meant eating bread in a smoky kitchen and pretending for one small smoky hour that life was simple. Powerful men talk too much in the dark. The smart workers listened. Secrets were currency traded for protection or freedom. One whispered rumor could destroy a senator faster than any assassin. The brothel was the empire's quietest intelligence agency. It starts, as all Roman secrets do, with wine. Not the good kind, the kind that tastes like sour grapes and bad decisions. You pour another cup for a senator who can stop talking, and he leans closer, voice dripping with privilege and self-pity. You wouldn't believe what the consul did with the treasury funds, he whispers. You smile politely, pretending to be impressed, but inside, you're already filing it away under potential leverage. This is the real economy of Rome. Not gold, not grain, but gossip. Coins can buy bread. Secrets can buy freedom. And here, in the Lupanar, where men abandon their armor and their common sense, the secrets flow like cheap wine. Every night the walls listen. The Lena knows it. She keeps her ears open, collecting whispers like a spider gathering silk. Senators complain about rivals, generals boast about upcoming campaigns, and merchants brag about new trade routes. All of it, tucked away, stored, and sometimes sold quietly, efficiently, and always for the right price. You learn the art quickly, never react, never seem too interested. Just nod, hum, and pour more wine. A man will tell you anything if he thinks you are not listening. You start recognizing patterns, who is cheating, who is plotting, who is doomed. By dawn, you could probably overthrow half the Senate just by reading your mental notes aloud. The Lena has an entire system. A coded ledger disguised as a client book, filled with phrases that mean everything to her and nothing to anyone else. The fisherman returns at dawn might actually mean a certain general has debts with the wrong people. 2 jars of fine oil could mean someone paid for silence instead of pleasure. It's an entire espionage network powered by candlelight and perfume. Sometimes she trades secrets with city guards, a name here, a favor there. Other times, she sells them to rival households, ensuring the brothel stays protected. Everyone owes her something, which makes her untouchable. Even the magistrates tread carefully. Arrest her, and half the city's elite might find their dirty laundry on public display. You've seen it happen once. A pompous senator tried to have the Lena shut down for moral corruption, which is bold coming from a man who spent 3 nights a week in her establishment. She smiled sweetly, then sent a messenger to his wife with details only a very observant employee could know. The next day, the charges vanished. The senator didn't he? He took a voluntary retirement to the countryside where he lived quietly and suspiciously alone. It's not just about survival. Sometimes the workers use their knowledge to protect each other. A soldier who hits too hard suddenly finds himself reassigned to a distant frontier. A cruel client discovers his debts called in by someone he has never met. Rome's justice system may have been slow, but the Lena-esque justice moved swiftly and usually involved fewer appeals. There's power in knowing things. You start to feel it, that subtle shift from object to observer. Men think they are in control because they pay, but you hold their words, their confessions, their weaknesses. You could ruin them with a sentence, and that knowledge hums in your chest like a secret heartbeat. Not all information is used cruelly. Sometimes it is exchanged for protection or for mercy. You once overheard a centurion admit that he planned to desert. You told no one. The next week he sent you a small silver ring gratitude, or maybe guilt. Either way, silence has its price. The walls of the lupanar could tell stories that would burn the forum to ash, affairs between senators and slaves, bribes to priests, plots whispered in the dark. If you wrote it all down, you could rule the empire without ever leaving your room. But you don't, because in Rome, the only thing more dangerous than knowing too little is knowing too much. So you keep the secrets. You smile when the men talk. You listen, always listening. By the end of the night, you've learned more about politics than any philosopher, and none of it was meant for your ears. As dawn creeps through the shutters, the city awakens blissfully unaware that the real power doesn't sit in marble halls. It sits here, in a dimly lit room, wrapped in silken shadows, holding the empire's greatest weakness, its own words, because the brothel may sell love, but its most valuable product is silence. And in Rome, silence is worth more than gold. Every once in a while, something real slipped through: affection, care, maybe even love. It was rare, fragile, and often punished, because Rome didn't like blurred lines. But in those moments, between business and breathing, people remembered they were still human. It starts the same as every other night. A client, a coin, a conversation rehearsed so many times it could be written on the walls. You light the oil lamp, pour the wine, and smile because that's what's expected. But tonight, the air feels different, quieter, slower. The man across from you doesn't reach for you immediately. He just talks about the weather in Ostia, about his sister's wedding, about how he hates figs but eats them anyway because it's polite. For a moment, you forget you're being paid to listen. You just listen. Love, or whatever fragile cousin of it existed here, wasn't supposed to happen. The Lena warned against it constantly. Affection costs extra, she'd say, half joking, half serious, and no one can afford that. Yet, in a city where everything was for sale, sincerity was the most expensive thing of all. It was always romance. Sometimes it was tenderness. A client who left extra coins and whispered, "Take a day off." A woman who brushed another's hair before sleep, murmuring stories of home. A brief hand squeeze between shifts, silent acknowledgement that you both existed beyond the makeup and the masks. In those moments, you could almost believe in softness again. The city outside, didn't he, Rome thrived on power, not vulnerability. Love made people weak, unpredictable, dangerous. Laws even existed to remind courtesans of their place: no marriage to citizens, no claims to respectability. You could inspire poetry, but never partnership. The system depended on that boundary staying firm, which, of course, meant people crossed it constantly. There are stories whispered among the workers, forbidden romances between courtesans and clients that ended in exile. Or worse, a freed woman who fell for a senator's son and was found floating in the Tiber. A Lena who tried to protect two lovers and lost her brothel for it. The city could forgive lust. It could even forgive betrayal. But it could never forgive love that didn't know its place. Still, it happened. Because humans are stubborn. Because sometimes two people in the wrong circumstances decide that pretending isn't enough. One night becomes two. Two becomes a routine. You start waiting for a familiar knock at the door, a certain laugh, the way he always forgets to remove his sandals. You tell yourself it's just habit, but it feels heavier than that. He tells you stories from the forum: politics, scandals, speeches. You tell him jokes that make him laugh so hard he nearly chokes on his wine. You never talk about the future. There isn't one. You exist in stolen hours between his duties and your debts. When he leaves, he always promises to return. And when he doesn't, you learn not to ask why. In Rome, everyone belongs to someone else eventually. Love here is survival dressed as softness. It's a touch that doesn't hurt, a glance that lingers too long, a night where you forget to count the hours. It is knowing that tomorrow it might end, that it will end, but cherishing it anyway. You learn to live for the brief moments between roles, where you're not property or patron, not courtesan or client, just two people breathing in the same fragile world. Sometimes you see it in others too. The way a woman keeps a small token hidden, a ring, a coin, a piece of fabric that smells like someone she shouldn't miss. The way another hums a tune she swore she forgot, smiling to herself. The Lena pretends not to notice, but she does. She's seen it all before, and she knows better than to interfere. Love burns fast here, and it always leaves smoke. When it ends, and it always does, you grieve quietly. No wailing, no theatrics. Just a long exhale and maybe a few extra drops of wine before bed. The other girls notice, but they don't say anything. Everyone has lost someone to roam, a lover, a home, a dream. It's the one thing the city guarantees. But the strange part, you don't regret it. For all its pain, for all its impossibility, those small moments of connection keep you alive. They remind you that beneath the performance, there's still a person who can feel, who can laugh, ache, and love, however briefly. And so, even after heartbreak, you light the lamp again, fix your hair, and open the door for the next stranger. Not because you've forgotten, but because you remember. Because in a city that sells desire, feeling something real even once is its own rebellion. In the end, love in Rome was like the oil lamp beside your bed, fragile, flickering, and bound to burn out. But for as long as it glowed, it made the shadows bearable. Roman brothels were marvels of engineering narrow corridors, soundproofed walls sometimes, and strategically placed vents. The layout was designed for efficiency and discretion. Basically, the first open-plan office but with worse HR policies. You step into the dim hallway of the lupanar and realize this isn't just a building, it's a machine. Every brick, every doorway, every creaky hinge was built for one purpose, to keep the Empire's appetite running smoothly. It is Rome's most intimate infrastructure project, designed by someone who clearly had strong opinions about workflow optimization. The corridor is barely wide enough for two people to pass, forcing everyone into close proximity convenient for conversation, less so for personal space. Oil lamps mounted in clay sconces flicker along the walls, casting a golden haze over the frescoes. Each painting serves a dual purpose: decoration and advertisement. You walk past depictions of gods, lovers, and a few scenes that would make even modern plumbing blush. The rooms cubicular line both sides of the hallway. Each is about the size of a walk-in closet, with a raised stone, platform acting as a bed. A thin mattress, a single lamp, and sometimes a curtain. If management was feeling fancy, privacy existed here the same way honesty did in Roman politics theoretically. Some brothels were humble, tucked into the Subura district's smoky maze of alleys. Others were ornate two-story establishments with mosaics, marble thresholds, and indoor plumbing, which sounds impressive until you remember where that plumbing led. The wealthy courtesan's house's domus meretrici had courtyards, fountains, and private dining rooms, blurring the line between pleasure palace and real estate portfolio. Still, the architecture followed patterns. Discretion was key. Many lupanaria had back entrances for clients who didn't want to be seen. A who's who of Rome's least discreet men, senators, merchants, poets, and soldiers, all slipped through those same narrow doors, pretending that anonymity existed in a city where everyone talked for a living. Ventilation shafts cut through the walls, an ingenious touch. They let out the smoke from oil lamps and the heavy air of the rooms. Unfortunately, they also carried sound. So while you might imagine privacy, What you really had was a citywide whisper network of moans, laughter, and the occasional awkward silence. Think of it as ancient surround sound, minus the volume control. Even the materials mattered. The thick volcanic stone of Pompeii's famous lupanar kept the building cool in the sweltering heat and muffled the chaos outside. It is still standing today, rooms labelled with carved numbers above their doors, as if waiting for customers who are 2,000 years late. Archaeologists found frescoes intact, coins in the corners, and graffiti that could double as customer reviews. Felix was here and had a good time. History, it turns out, has a sense of humour. You run your hand along the rough wall. The stone feels cold, indifferent, eternal. It has seen everything: laughter, pain, pleasure, survival, and still stands silent. The architecture was practical, yes, but it was also psychological. The narrow halls created intimacy. The dim lighting softened floors. The symmetry offered illusion that this was order, not chaos. Business, not desperation. Upstairs, if the Lena could afford it, there might be a small office, a place for accounting, bribes, and the occasional emergency nap. Beneath, in the basement, amphorae of wine and jars of oil lined the walls like an altar to commerce. It was an entire economy contained in one building, and like any Roman institution, hierarchy was built into the structure. The best rooms went to the highest earners, those near the entrance, with fresher air and better lamps. The newer or enslaved workers were sent to the darker back rooms, where the lamps flickered and time blurred. Architecture mirrored society, tiered, organized, and brutally efficient. There is beauty in it too, though in the geometry of survival. These walls were witness to the empyreas, most human moments: desire, loneliness, laughter, greed, and the endless search for connection. The very layout forced people to cross paths, to hear one another, to share space even in secrecy. For all its stone and mortar, the building breathed. You can almost hear it now, the echo of sandals on stone, the low hum of conversation, the flick of a match lighting oil. Rome designed its brothels like it designed its politics, loudly, cleverly, and always with an exit strategy. If you squint, it almost feels modern. Tight corridors, minimal privacy, management tracking your performance, clients with unrealistic expectations. The difference is, at least here, you get paid up front. So yes, the lupanar was a marvel not just of architecture but of anthropology, proof that even in an empire obsessed with marble and glory, someone still sat down and said, "What is the optimal airflow for a bad idea?" And 2,000 years later, the walls still stand. Crumbling, sunlit, silent but full of stories, the architecture of desire endures, long after the desires themselves have turned to dust. Religion and sex weren't the opposites in Rome, they were colleagues. Festivals like the Floralia turned the streets into public carnivals of flowers and flirtation. Priests didn't condemn pleasure, they scheduled it. Somewhere a toga-clad holy man is taking notes. The knock on the brothel door isn't from a soldier, a senator, or a sailor. It's from a priest. You freeze, instinctively straightening your tunic. Not because you're guilty, though. Technically, you always are in Rome, but because religion in this city is unpredictable. It could bless you, ban you, or borrow you for a festival. Sometimes all three before lunch. The Lena answers the door and sighs in recognition. "Ah," she mutters, "Floralia season. That explains the wreaths, the wine, and the faint sound of flutes outside." The priest smiles too wide, too rehearsed, and presents a list written in careful ink. "We require volunteers," he says. Of course they do. It is springtime, and that means the goddess Flora demands a public celebration of fertility, which, In Roman terms translates to party until the city runs out of grapes and inhibitions. The Floralia wasn't your average festival. It was a week-long explosion of colour, laughter, and collective bad judgment. Flowers covered every archway, animals were released into the streets, and the air smelled like perfume and livestock. Prostitutes were not only welcome, they were the stars. The idea was to honour the goddess of blossoming by, well, blossoming publicly. You can picture it. The Lupana empties into the streets, the courtesans wearing garlands of roses and little else. People cheer, musicians play, and priests sprinkle petals like divine confetti. Somewhere in the crowd, a senator pretends to be deeply moved by the religious significance of it all. It's chaotic, theatrical, and deeply Roman. The priests lead the procession, solemnly carrying idols of Flora, while behind them the dancers whirl and laugh. You join in because everyone does religion. Here is a participatory sport. Offerings of wine are poured onto the ground. The crowd drinks what's left. The boundaries between sacred and profane dissolve faster than the wine supply. By sunset, the city is one giant performance. Public stages rise from nowhere, and actors many from the same ranks as the courtesans perform bawdy comedies. The audience howls as performers strip, joke, and improvise stories that somehow all end with a moral about fertility. The priests clap politely from the front row. After all, this is worship. Holy chaos at its finest. The ironies are lost on you. These same priests might bless your establishment one week and tax it the next. They call the lupanar a necessary sin, but half of them have regular appointments. Religion in Rome isn't about purity, it's about balance. The gods didn't expect perfection. They expected participation and possibly a good time. Inside the brothel, the line between temple and trade blurs further. Every room has its own little shrine to Venus, Bacchus, or Priapus, the god who never skipped leg day. You light a small lamp before work, whisper a prayer not for forgiveness, but for favourable outcomes, gentle clients, steady income, minimal weirdness. Priests visit occasionally, not to condemn but to purify a ritual that conveniently involves expensive incense and an unspoken service fee. One even offered spiritual consultation once, though his definition of spirituality involved dim lighting and enthusiastic blessings. You declined politely. Still, there's comfort in the ritual, the offerings, the prayers, the sense that even the gods understand what you're doing. In a city built on indulgence, it's reassuring to know the divine is indulgent too. Venus doesn't judge, she multitasks. Bacchus forgives everything after the second cup. And Flora, well, she just wants everyone to enjoy themselves responsibly. As the night deepens, the festival spills into the lupanar. Petals litter the floor, laughter drifts through the corridors, and even the Lena relaxes her usual scowl. The priest returns briefly to bless the house, waving incense in lazy circles. "May Venus favour your endeavours," he intones, then accepts a cup of wine. A second later, he's singing off-key with the musicians. You realise something: Rome didn't separate its vices and virtues. It built temples to both, then threw a party to celebrate the merger. The gods weren't distant judges, they were co-conspirators. Every act of pleasure was also an offering. Every indulgence a small prayer in motion. By dawn the petals are trampled, the wine amphorae are empty, and the priests are snoring in the courtyard. You sweep the floor, the scent of incense and sweat lingering in the air. Somewhere, a new day begins, and Rome returns to pretending it's respectable again. But for one night, one glorious, flower-covered, wine-drenched night, sin and sanctity shared the same stage, and everyone, from priest to prostitute, remembered that holiness and humanity have always danced to the same rhythm, because in Rome, salvation was never about denial. It was about knowing when to pour the next cup. As dawn crept over the rooftops, the lupanar quieted. Workers cleaned, counted coins, and whispered jokes about the night's customers. Outside, the bakeress ovens roared to life. Rome stretched, yawned, and pretended it didn't know what had happened 6 hours ago. The air feels softer now, that in-between moment where the city exhales. The torches gutter low, casting sleepy shadows on the frescoed walls. You hear the faint splash of water as someone scrubs the floor, the dull clink of coins being tallied, the rhythmic sweep of a broom made from bundled reeds. The chaos has dissolved into ritual. You sit at the edge of the stone bed, wrapping a worn shawl around your shoulders. Your muscles ache, but in a way that feels familiar, almost dependable. Fatigue is its own kind of certainty. Across the room, one of the younger girls is laughing quietly, recounting a story about a client who fell asleep mid-sentence and snored through his own flattery. The leaner pretends not to listen, but her smirk gives her away. The lamp beside you sputters. You tilt it gently, coaxing the last drops of olive oil to the wick. The flame steadies, warm and small. It throws light across the walls over the painted bodies frozen forever in poses of desire and victory. The colours are still vivid, even now. You wonder how many people have stared at these same faces, how many lives have come and gone beneath their watchful, smiling eyes. Outside, the city is already shifting gears. A donkey brays in the distance. Somewhere a woman is shouting about fresh bread. The night-as customers, draped in togas and excuses, are scattering home before sunrise betrays them. A senator mutters a prayer to Venus for discretion. A soldier whistles tunelessly, trying not to look guilty. Rome forgives all sins at dawn, or at least pretends to forget them until the next night. Inside, you help count the coins, the tactile proof that everything, even pleasure, has its price. The leaner licks her thumb, stacking denarii into neat little piles. Her eyes sharp despite the hour. Not bad, she murmurs, half to herself. The gods were generous tonight. Then she yawns, stretches her back and adds, or maybe just the customers. Her humour, like her management style, is dry enough to qualify as desert terrain. One of the workers collects discarded wreaths from the floor remnants of laughter and brief affection. Another rinses a basin of water turned murky with powder and perfume. The scent lingers in the air, an invisible memory of the nightess illusions. For all the talk of sin and scandal, what remains is ordinary. People tidying up after work, sharing tired smiles, making plans for breakfast. You slip outside for air, stepping into the narrow alleyway behind the brothel. The skies are faint grey-pink, the kind of colour that only exists when night is reluctant to leave. The stones under your feet are slick with dew. You breathe in smoke, yeast, and the faint sweetness of crushed grapes. Somewhere nearby, a baker is pulling the first loaves from his oven. The smell is so comforting it's almost unfair. You close your eyes and listen. The city is waking, but gently the hum of cartwheels, the rustle of fabric, the sigh of the Tiber rolling toward the sea. This is Rome's most honest hour, the in-between. Before the senators rehearse their morals, before the markets fill with shouts, before the masks go back on. For a brief moment you feel invisible in the best way, not erased, just unseen. You can exist without performing. No painted smile, no clever laugh. Just you, barefoot in an alley that smells like bread and last night's perfume, watching the light crawl up the ancient stones. You head back inside as the first rays slip through the shutters. The leaner is already closing her ledger, humming an off-key tune that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. The others are settling into their beds, pulling thin blankets over tired limbs. You lie down on your straw mattress, listening to the distant sounds of Rome beginning again. The city never sleeps, it just trades shifts. The bakers take over for the courtesans, the merchants replace the poets. The cycle continues, endlessly, beautifully absurd. As your eyes grow heavy, you realize that the night will start again soon enough, new faces, new stories, new mistakes waiting to happen. But for now, for this fleeting breath of quiet, the empire pauses. And somewhere between exhaustion and peace, you think, Rome may own the world, but it is the night that owns Rome. Even in permissive Rome, moralists complained. Philosophers like Seneca wagged their fingers about decadence often, after leaving the same establishments. Hypocrisy, like wine, was never in short supply. The empire didn't crumble because of its vices, but it definitely got distracted. It is the morning after, and Rome is hungover not just from wine but from itself. The temples smell of incense and self-righteousness. The senators are already rehearsing speeches about morality, virtue, and discipline, while carefully avoiding eye contact with the people who know where they were last night. Seneca, bless his very tired soul, writes that lust corrupts the soul, which is bold, coming from a man who spent half his life tutoring Nero, a walk-in scandal in human form. Other philosophers joined in, of course. They called the brothels the rot beneath the marble, the shame of the city, a moral contagion. They loved those phrases. It made them sound serious, intellectual, and not at all like the kind of men who occasionally research these places firsthand. The truth is, Rome adored its vices, it just hated being caught enjoying them. Every time the empire indulged, it also scolded itself. Plays mocked decadence while their audiences drank themselves sideways. Moralists condemned public nudity during festivals from the front row. There's a reason the phrase, "do as I say, not as I do," might as well have been carved into the Senate door. You picture one of these moral crusaders staggering home at dawn, toga crooked, breath smelling like regret and imported wine. He passes a temple, makes the sign of respect, then mutters something about restoring virtue. A few hours later, he'll be in the Forum, proclaiming that Rome must return to its pure values, the same values he misplaced around midnight. Even the emperors joined the act. Augustus, who was very fond of his public morality laws, established the Lex Julia de Adulteris, making adultery illegal. Then his daughter Julia became the city's most famous adulterer. The scandal was magnificent. Senators fainted, poets composed veiled verses, and somewhere Venus probably laughed herself breathless. For all their talk of restraint, Romans couldn't resist spectacle. The more they moralized, the more they indulged. The contradiction wasn't a bug, it was a feature. They believed that balance meant doing everything in equal measure. A sermon in the morning, debauchery by night. As one poet quipped, "We build temples by day and desecrate them by torchlight." The lupanar, of course, felt the ripple of every public crackdown. Occasionally, the Aedil's Rome's morality police would march through the Subura, making a show of cleansing the city. They'd scowl, confiscate some ledgers, arrest a few unlucky souls, and then quietly accept bribes to forget the whole affair. Justice, like pleasure, was negotiable. The workers took it in stride. Ah, one would sigh, virtue season again. They'd hide the coin jars, scrub the walls, and wait for the outrage to blow over. It always did. Rome's moral indignation was as short-lived as its wine supply. By the next festival, the same senators were back, more discreet but no less devoted. It wasn't just hypocrisy, it was ritual. Outrage gave Rome something to believe in. Condemning vice allowed people to feel pure, even as they lined up for the next round. It was collective guilt management, wrapped in philosophy and fig leaves. Seneca himself once wrote, We are not wise men, but men who wish to be wise, which, if you translate it from stoic to honest, means we know better, but will absolutely do it again. And do it again they did for centuries. You can't help but smile at the pattern. Every civilization builds its own moral hangover, indulging in the night, then pretending purity at dawn. Rome just did it with better architecture and worse self-awareness. By midday, the forum buzzes with gossip. A senator delivers a long speech about degeneracy, pausing dramatically as if he can hear the invisible laughter of the gods. The crowd nods solemnly, their hangovers glinting in the sun. Someone in the back mutters, "Didn't he sponsor last night's games?" Everyone pretends not to hear. Meanwhile, in the back streets, the lupanar reopens. Lamps are trimmed, floors swept, perfumes reapplied. The city's moral pulse resets. Tomorrow the same men will return, coins in hand, pretending, as their first time, and Rome will continue, gloriously unbothered, a place where ideals and indulgence share the same bed and never quite learn each other's names. Because in the end, the empire didn't fall from sin. It simply got distracted by pleasure long enough for history to sneak in the back door. Centuries later, archaeologists find the remains: faded murals, broken oil lamps, graffiti that still blushes through the dust. The laughter, the pain, the survival, all frozen in stone. The lupanar is long silent, but its walls remember everything. You stand in the ruins now, 2,000 years too late to buy a drink, but right on time to hear the ghosts. The air is dry, heavy with history and something almost human, that faint sweetness of olive oil. Long gone, but somehow still here. The walls rise around you, their once bright frescoes now faded to soft ochre and ghostly pinks. The paint peels, but the stories stay. Here is a small room, stone bed, narrow doorway, and above it, a painted figure mid-embrace. The faces are smudged by centuries of wind and ash, yet they still glow faintly in the light. The archaeologist beside you clears his throat, tries to describe the scene academically and fails, because this isn't just architecture, it's evidence of living. A few steps further, you see the graffiti-carved words, shaky and unfiltered. Marcellus was here. I love Iris. Restitutus made this place laugh. There's humour, vanity, affection, the unedited voice of people who never thought their jokes would outlive empires. The writing is uneven, the Latin clumsy, and yet it's perfect. You run your hand along the wall, feeling the grooves left by someone who likely didn't think twice when they made them. They weren't writing history, they were marking presence. Proof that they existed, that they felt something, that they mattered for a moment. The stone kept the secret long after the city above it burned. The lamps, once filled with oil and flame, lie cracked on the floor. Their soot still stains the ceiling in faint rings. You can imagine the flicker, the same flicker that once danced across faces, bodies, coins, and lies. That same golden light that made the rooms feel softer, the nights shorter, the choices easier. Now, it just falls in through gaps in the roof, filtered by silence and centuries. Outside, tourists shuffle and whisper. They read the plaques, snap photos, and try to imagine what it must have been like: the noise, the laughter, the lives. But it's hard to picture warmth in a ruin. Hard to imagine heartbeats where there was only dust. Yet the stones hum quietly, as if trying to tell you it wasn't always this quiet. Somewhere nearby, a guide recites facts. Prostitution was legal, workers were taxed, rooms were numbered. But the numbers miss the human part: the woman painting her face with powdered lead, the leaner counting coins by lamplight, the senator whispering secrets he shouldn't. Facts preserve the framework. The walls preserve the soul. You close your eyes and listen. the sound of sandals on stone, the clink of bronze coins, a low laugh, a voice whispering something in Greek, soft enough that even the gods must lean closer to hear. Then silence again. The ghosts recede, polite enough to let you go. The archaeologists will record the dimensions, the pigment samples, the carbon dates. They'll map where the walls fell and what survived. But what they can measure, what they'll never quite capture, is the warmth that once filled this space. The way human voices echoed down these corridors, carrying jokes, prayers, and promises that time couldn't keep. The lupanar is just stone now, but the stones still feel alive. Every crack a story, every carving a heartbeat. It's not just a ruin, it's a record of the oldest truth in history, that even in the ugliest corners of empire people reached for connection, for touch, for laughter in the dark. As you step back into the sunlight, the past clings for a moment, like the scent of incense that refuses to fade. You turn once more toward the entrance, where thousands once walked in seeking something they couldn't name. The city is gone, the empire's fallen, the marble crumbled, the names forgotten, but the echoes remain soft, human, unashamed. Because Rome, for all its grandeur, was never just temples and triumphs. It was people lonely, brave, ridiculous people trying for one brief night to feel alive. In the end, the story of Rome, Brothels isn't really about sex, it's about survival, about power disguised as pleasure, and people navigating a world where everything, even affection, had a price. Behind the frescoes and the laughter was a city that ran on contradiction, moral in the streets, indulgent in the dark. The lupanar was more than a business. It was a mirror showing Rome exactly who it was when no one was watching. For the enslaved workers, it was survival. For the wealthy clients, escape. For the empire itself, a reminder that control and desire were always intertwined. Every coin exchanged was a confession. Every whisper in the dark, a glimpse of truth. Centuries later, all that remains are stone walls, fading colours, and a few lines of graffiti, but they still hum with life. Because what they left behind wasn't shame. It was evidence of humanity messy, longing, imperfect humanity. Rome's greatness wasn't just in its marble or armies. It was in its people, the ones who endured, adapted, and kept laughing, even in the dim light of a brothel. That's the real legacy of the empire. Not its conquest, but its chaos. Not its purity, but its persistence. And as history quietly reminds us, even the grandest civilizations are built on very human needs.